Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we're stepping into a world far removed from our own, but one that feels strangely familiar. A world where faith is rare, hope is flickering, and the noise of everyday life drowns out the voice of something greater. But in the midst of all that, a voice breaks through. A voice that calls one man to leave behind everything he knows. His country, his people, even his name will be changed. This isn't just any story. This is the moment when God calls Abraham, and nothing will ever be the same again. Imagine this, you're sitting under the same stars you've seen every night since childhood, surrounded by your flocks and your family. Life is predictable, even if not perfect. You know the land, the culture, the gods your ancestors prayed to, and suddenly, out of nowhere, you hear a voice. It's not just any voice, it's a divine command. It tells you to walk away from it all, to pack up your entire life, leave your father's house, and go. But go where? The voice doesn't say. Not yet. That man's name was Abram. Not yet Abraham. Not yet the father of nations. Just a man. A real, flawed, flesh and blood human being. He wasn't a king. He wasn't famous. He wasn't looking for glory. But God chose him. Why? Why Abram out of all the people on earth? What did God see in him? That's what we're about to uncover in this story. As we dig into the story of God calling Abraham, we're not just learning history. We're diving into the roots of three of the world's biggest faiths: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It all begins here with a single moment, a single step of faith. This is a turning point in the biblical narrative, and the choices Abram makes will echo across generations. But before he becomes Abraham, the father of faith, he must make the hardest decision of his life. Leave behind everything secure and step into the unknown. And not because it makes sense, or because the rewards are clear, but because he chooses to trust. This is what makes his story so powerful. It's not about perfection, it's about obedience. It's about what happens when God speaks and a human being dares to listen. There's tension already brewing in Abram's household. His family has roots in the land of Ur, a place rich with culture and tradition, but also full of idol worship. His father Terah started the journey to Canaan but never finished it. He settled halfway in Haran. Why? Was he too tired? Too afraid? Or was God waiting for someone with enough courage to keep going? And now the moment has come. Abram hears the voice. The command is clear. Go to the land I will show you. But where? There's no map, no GPS, no clear path, just a promise. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. But what does that mean, and what will it cost? As the desert winds rise and the tents are packed, Abram stands at the edge of everything he's ever known. His wife Sarai looks on, uncertain. His nephew Lot follows, not yet knowing the weight of this journey. And heaven is watching closely. So, will he go, or will fear hold him back? Stick around, because this journey is just getting started. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications, because in the next part of this story, we'll follow Abram's first steps into the unknown and face the obstacles that test his faith in ways he never imagined. This is God Calls Abraham, and this is where everything begins. Abram stood still, heart pounding, staring into the horizon. The morning light painted the hills in gold, but his thoughts were heavy. Sarai was quiet, her eyes searching his face, as if hoping for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew. The look in Abram's eyes was different. Something had shifted. The voice he heard wasn't just a passing thought or a dream. It was real, and it was asking everything of him. Around them, Haran bustled with life, merchants calling out in the market, children running through the narrow paths, flocks being herded through the streets. It was a land of comfort now, a place where they had built some stability after leaving Ur. Terah, Abram's father, had brought the family here, hoping to settle and find peace. But that peace never lasted. Terah had died in Haran, and something about that unfinished journey lingered in Abram's mind. Canaan was always the destination, but they had stopped short. Why? There were questions that wouldn't leave him. Why did God choose him? Why now? He wasn't young anymore. He was 75, with no children, and his wife Sarai had been unable to conceive. The promise to become a great nation sounded almost cruel. How could he become the father of anything when he had no heir? And yet the words echoed in his heart louder than any doubt. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. Still, nothing about this made sense. He had to walk away from wealth, land, family, familiarity, and walk toward what? A land God would show him. Someday, somehow. Would people laugh at him? Would they call him a fool? What if he failed? What if he misheard? These weren't the thoughts of a fearless hero. These were the thoughts of a man wrestling with something too big for words. Lot, his nephew, watched him closely. Young, curious, a bit too eager perhaps. Lot didn't have the same weight on his shoulders, but he felt the pull of something beyond the ordinary. And yet, neither of them knew the dangers waiting in the land ahead. Strange kings, famine, betrayal, tests of loyalty, and even darker moments that would challenge their bond and their faith. The call had come. The decision was made. But the road was still unwritten. And somewhere, in the silence between heaven and earth, the next test was already on its way. The journey had begun. Abram, Sarai, Lot, their servants, and all their livestock moved slowly out of Haran. With each step, the familiar grew smaller behind them, and the unknown stretched wider ahead. The road was dry and uncertain, winding through deserts and unfamiliar towns. Every face they passed was a reminder. They were strangers now, wanderers without a home, following a promise only Abram had heard. But even as their feet moved forward, doubt lingered in the quiet moments. Sarai rarely spoke of the journey. She followed Abram loyally, but inside she carried her own private storm. The promise of children was hardest on her. Years had passed with no child, and now they were older. She wondered why God would promise something so impossible. Her silence wasn't from fear, but from heartbreak. Every sunrise reminded her of what she lacked, even as she smiled beside her husband. Lot, on the other hand, felt excitement more than fear. The open land, the newness of everything, it felt like a chance to carve his own path. But he was beginning to feel the weight of responsibility too. His herds were growing, his men were strong, and whispers of ambition stirred in his heart. He admired Abram, but he also wanted something for himself. It wasn't envy yet, but something was building under the surface. And in the distance, Canaan was more than a land of promise. It was a land of danger. The people there were strong, well-established. Abram had no claim, no army, no city of his own. The promise of land felt far away. Every night he looked to the stars, trying to remember what the voice had said. But stars can feel cold when fear grows in the dark. They were faithful, yes, but faith would soon be tested. The sun beat down harshly as Abram and his people finally stepped into the land of Canaan. But instead of celebration, there was only silence. The land was already occupied, filled with fierce tribes, walled cities, and eyes that watched every movement. It didn't feel like a promise, it felt like a threat. Abram stood quietly, his face unreadable, as he built an altar to the Lord who had led him here. But inside, a storm raged. This was the land, this was the blessing. The tension among the travelers was growing. Resources were stretched thin, tempers ran short, and the journey had taken its toll. The herds of Abram and Lot grew too large to share the same space. The land couldn't support both. Arguments broke out between their herdsmen, small at first, then louder. Abram tried to keep the peace, but something had shifted. Lot had grown confident, perhaps too confident. He began eyeing the greener land near the cities, especially near a place called Sodom. It was beautiful, fertile, and dangerous. But even before that decision could unfold, a greater challenge struck: famine. The food began to run out. People grew weak. The land, already unfamiliar, now became unforgiving. Abram had no choice but to go down to Egypt, seeking survival. It was a risky move, a foreign land with its own rules and dangers, and Sarai, already carrying the burden of barrenness, now had to face a terrifying new fear. Abram asked her to say she was his sister, hoping it would protect them both. But the cost of that lie would soon unravel everything. Whispers of danger rose. Egypt would not be a safe escape. Tension thickened. Suspicion grew. Faith began to waver. And the promise? It felt more distant than ever. The test had truly begun. Egypt was not what Abram had imagined. At first it seemed like the right move. Fields full of grain, bustling cities, food for the hungry, and shelter for his tired people. But peace was short-lived. Pharaoh's men took notice of Sarai almost immediately. She was beautiful, even in her older age, and the rumor spread quickly through the palace gates. And since Abram had told them she was his sister, Pharaoh's messengers came without hesitation. Sarai was taken to the palace, and Abram was given gifts, livestock, servants, silver. To everyone else, it looked like Abram had gained favor, but inside he was breaking. The very woman who had followed him across the unknown was now locked behind palace walls. Sarai's silence turned into sorrow. She had trusted Abram, but now she was alone, her future uncertain. Pharaoh had plans, and the clock was ticking. Abram had made a decision out of fear. Fear of being killed, fear of losing control, fear that God might not protect him after all. And that decision, though it bought him time, came with a price he didn't fully understand yet. But just as it seemed like all was lost, something unexpected happened. Strange sicknesses swept through Pharaoh's household. Servants whispered of a curse. No one could explain it. Dreams grew dark. Unease crept into the palace, and Pharaoh somehow connected it to Sarai. Who was this woman? Why had everything gone wrong since her arrival? Meanwhile, outside the palace, Abram wrestled with guilt. His wealth had grown, but his heart was empty. He had placed his future, his marriage, and even the promise in danger. Could he still call himself chosen? Could he still believe in a blessing when everything around him screamed failure? But just as Pharaoh prepared to confront Abram, a second twist began to unfold. Lot, restless, ambitious, and blinded by opportunity, had started making plans of his own. He didn't want to return to the hard road of wandering. He had his eyes set on the plains of Jordan, especially the land near Sodom. It was rich, green, and full of promise. But what looked like gain from afar was in reality a trap. And back in Canaan, the tensions were only growing. Rival kings stirred in the shadows, boundaries were being drawn, war was coming, and Abram's faith was about to face its most dangerous test yet. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Pharaoh summoned Abram to the palace, his face filled with anger and confusion. "Why did you lie?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" Abram stood silent, ashamed, unable to offer anything but the truth. Pharaoh didn't punish him, but the damage was done. Sarai was released, unharmed, but their time in Egypt ended in haste. With guards at their side, Abram and his household were driven out, along with the wealth they had gained, but also with a deep scar that couldn't be seen. Egypt was behind them now, but its weight still followed. Back in Canaan, the land was not at peace. Tensions had reached a breaking point between Abram's and Lot's herdsmen. The conflict was no longer avoidable. Abram, weary from the battles within and around him, chose peace over pride. He offered Lot the first choice of land. Without hesitation, Lot chose the lush plains of the Jordan, near Sodom. It looked like paradise, but Abram saw what Lot refused to. The people of Sodom were wicked, and Lot's path, though easy, was leading straight into danger. Not long after they parted, war broke out. Kings from the east invaded the region, sweeping through the land like a storm. Sodom was captured, and with it, Lot was taken prisoner. Word reached Abram quickly. This was more than a family crisis. It was a test of everything he had become. Abram, once a wanderer, now took up arms. With 318 trained men from his household, he launched a surprise attack by night. Against all odds, Abram defeated the enemy kings and rescued Lot, along with the captives and stolen goods. The victory was powerful, but the real twist came after. As Abram returned, he was met by a mysterious figure, Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He brought bread and wine, blessed Abram, and spoke words that echoed like thunder. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." It was a moment of deep recognition. Abram had been chosen not just to walk in faith, but to shape history. Yet just as hope returned, God's promise came again. Clearer, deeper. "Look up at the sky and count the stars. So shall your offspring be." But Sarai was still barren. Time was passing. And though the battle was won, the real struggle, the one within, was far from over. As the dust from the battle settled and the stars once again filled the skies over Canaan, Abram found himself changed. Not just a victor of war, but a man reshaped by everything he had endured. Fear, failure, faith, and finally, purpose. The land that once felt foreign now felt familiar. Each step, each scar, each silent prayer had brought him to this place. Not just physically, but spiritually. He was no longer the man who left Haran unsure and hesitant. He had become a man who walked with God, even when the path was unclear. Sarai stood beside him, strong in her own quiet way. Though her womb was still empty, her heart was full of hope again. She had seen what God had done, rescuing Lot, defeating Michael. Abram held on to that promise too. God's words echoed in his mind every night. Your descendants will be as countless as the stars. And though they hadn't seen the fulfillment yet, they both knew one thing for sure: God had not forgotten them. Lot returned to Sodom, despite Abram's warnings. He chose comfort over caution, wealth over wisdom. It was his path to walk now. Abram had done what he could. Not every story and now became unforgiving. Abram had no choice but to go down to Egypt, says the way we want it to. But some lessons come through watching others, not saving them. As for Abram, he returned to the altar he had built when he first entered Canaan. There, beneath the open sky, he worshipped again. This time not just as a man hoping to believe, but as one who had seen faith in action. His journey wasn't over, but a chapter had closed. And in that stillness, God's promise stood taller than ever. This story, God calling Abram, is not just about land or legacy. It's about what happens when an ordinary person dares to believe something extraordinary. It's about trust when nothing makes sense, obedience when the cost is high, and holding on to hope even when time tries to steal it. Abram's journey reminds us that sometimes the greatest call isn't about where we go, but who we become on the way. And as the stars shone overhead, Abram knew one thing for sure: the story had only just begun.